Good day to everyone. Today we're going to talk about the grant test, what it is and the background information behind it. I would like to take a moment now to warn people, especially pregnant women, the content of this video will be a little bit graphic and it does involve deceased infants. So if that's something which you may find upsetting, then please do switch off the video. So the grant test is a legal sort of framework or test that the NMC uses now as a result of this case, which was heard. So a little bit of background information about it. So it's in regards to a midwife who was very experienced, worked for a number of years, and there was multiple charges levied against her of issues that had occurred during her working time. So one involves another midwife who was on preceptorship. Preceptorship being a period of learning immediately after finishing your training. So you could be a registered midwife or a registered nurse, but if you're on preceptorship, then you're going to be still supervised, but not so much as a student midwife or nurse, if that makes sense. You're a little bit more supervised if you're on preceptorship, and you get some extra days for training, to put it simply. A midwife on preceptorship requested her to do a vaginal examination on a patient who she was concerned about. She said her CTG readings, just like a pregnancy monitor, were coming up abnormal, and she wanted a more experienced midwife to come and have a look. She did not attend. The midwife on preceptorship requested again. She did not attend, and the baby, which I believe was at 20 weeks gestation, died. There was another one. So there's another charge in relation to that, where she had confronted the midwife on preceptorship aggressively, locked her in a room with her, asked her why she's reported it, etc., etc. And then on another charge, spoke to them insensitively, asked them why they wanted to see a priest, which is just, when you know the background behind this one, disgusting. Failed to explain to patient that she was unable to use, I think it was a special delivery room for stillborns. So I believe that the baby was already considered to no longer be alive, and so they tend to try and, if they're going to give birth to them, they try and do that in a separate area. And both her partner and the patient were extremely distressed because they were in the same area as other live births taking place, so they could hear babies crying who had just been born. And obviously when you're giving birth to a stillbirth, in advance, knowing that's not very nice. And clearly there's a clear reason why you'd want to see a priest or a person to help reassure you in those times. It's just terrible. Why would you challenge a patient on that when they, I understand that you probably get desensitized to it over time as a midwife, but you've really got to keep those levels of empathy up to a certain level. You can't be challenging them on things like that. Not when a baby's died. So a little bit more background information. So the baby had died 20 weeks in gestation in utero, which means in the uterus. So she was situated in the delivery room, could hear other women in labour, and she did not explain to her why she could not give birth in the SANS room, which means stillbirth and neonatal death charity room, which I guess is a separate room that was made by that charity. And so she's denied all these allegations. And so another charge, which was completely disgusting. Words cannot describe how abhorrent these charges are if they were true. So, instructed a junior midwife to record a delivery as a termination of pregnancy, when in fact the patient had gone into spontaneous labour, so there was no termination of the pregnancy. She didn't check if the baby was born alive, and both the junior midwife, the patient and the partner said the baby had born alive, and she did nothing. Failed to provide appropriate support, altered the funeral form, I'm not familiar with a funeral form, to show that the baby's time of death was the same as the time of birth. You see, yeah, so she's basically saying it's a stillbirth. Removed the entry from the live births register, and entered it onto the non-viable register. Wow, yeah. And so the baby's arms and legs were moving when it was born. Now you can have some movements like this after you've deceased, but it was alleged that the midwife didn't check for a pulse or respiration rate. But the baby was moving, and the person this is alleged against apparently put the baby into a kidney dish, which is a metal container. So obviously one of the big things when babies are born is heat, so usually they're put under a very warm lamp to make sure that they don't get too cold after birth. So placing them in a metal container without that light will obviously induce hypothermia and potentially end the baby's life after they're born. It sounds very bad. She definitely should have checked. It's pretty disgusting. That's probably one of the worst things I could imagine. A mother just giving birth and seeing their baby moving in a kidney dish without any reassurance, or at least the midwife checking and saying, "I'm very sorry, but the baby's passed away." At least that's more reassuring. If there's no heart rate, no respiration rate, the midwife has checked thoroughly to make sure that the baby has passed away, at least to remove the doubt from the mother. Because it says here the junior midwife wasn't sure what to do. And so there are more charges, some back and forth legal stuff discussed. And so then what came of it was a new test, which I think it was Justice Cox had devised for assessing whether or not a nurse or a midwife should be struck from the register, or what kind of sanctions they need to put in place, if any. And so it's got sort of 4 legs or 4 arms, or however you want to, it's referred to in different contexts, but there's 4 elements to it. The more which are engaged, the more likely you're going to receive more severe penalties or sanctions. And it will also be in keeping with the other cases that we discuss, where people don't show these sorts of insight or and so the 4 parts of the grant test are: has in the past acted and or is liable in the future to act so as to put a patient or patients at unwarranted risk of harm, and or has in the past brought and or is liable in the future to bring the medical profession into disrepute, and or has in the past breached and or is liable in the future to breach one of the fundamental tenets of the medical profession and or has in the past acted dishonestly and or is liable to act dishonestly in the future. So I think you could summarize with part 1, are they putting people at risk? Part 2, are they bringing the reputation of the profession into disrepute? Number 3, have they breached any of the fundamental principles of the profession? And number 4, have they acted dishonestly? And so the more of those you engage, the more severe your sanctions are going to be. And this is why insight, reflection, and admittance are really important. And it's also why you'll find that nurses that attempt to cover up what they've done, refuse to admit what they've done, then of course they all enact Arm D, and usually they would have engaged one of the other 3 arms as well, so that would have been 2 if they also refused to accept responsibility.